Bob Costas is not just the best sportscaster of his generation, he's one of the best broadcasters of his generation. Storytelling, good advice, and keen insights are all part of his repertoire. It's impossible to tell the story of television and sports without mentioning Bob Costas. I personally find it a wonderful gift to have lived in a time where Mr. Costas treated us to the highest level of entertainment, wit, and unabashedly honest commentary. Bob, welcome to Great Dane Nation. And since we're at the unabashedly honest commentary, how's the eye? How's the eye doing?
Well, we're now 7 years removed from that. No, going on 8 years removed from that. We're in 2022 now.
Yeah, I know.
When they diagnosed it, they said, "Oh, it'll be gone in no more than 3 weeks." And I said, "Well, that's exactly how long the Olympics lasts." And at first, when they diagnosed it, they thought it might have been some kind of bacterial infection. And they gave me some antibiotics and said it'll be gone in 3 days. But then when it jumped from one eye to the other, then they knew it was viral. And there's nothing you can do about it except try to soldier through, which I did as best I could. I had to sit out for several days, but I did as many of the days and nights as I could. And then by the time I landed back in the United States, it was all but completely cleared up, which didn't do me any good.
Hey, you sold it through it, and I can relate to that. I was doing NFL Europe in 2005, doing a 20-month stint where I was unemployed, and I did 3 games in NFL Europe. I was out of Amsterdam. I had a place there, and then I was doing a game. All of a sudden, my eye, I had this, I don't know if it was gingivitis. It was some kind of iritis, and it lasted. I had drops. I did all of that, and I had to go to an eye specialist when I got back. So I totally relate. You think it's minor, and actually it just lingers. So
yeah, nothing you can do about it. Just ride it out.
Anyway, enough about the eyes.
Yeah.
I want to talk right off the top because I love your honest takes. I think it's one of my favorite things about you. What endears you to so many is that you are I can't even say that, unapologetically honest. Antonio Brown, this past weekend, he takes his stuff off, he leaves. There's a lot of speculation. Was he injured? Told to leave. What's your take on this?
Well, it's pretty obvious, and no need to pile on. He is a very troubled man. He has issues that go way beyond whether he'll ever play in the NFL again. And the evidence of that is overwhelming. I doubt that anyone would ever take another chance on him. 4 teams have given up on him in the space of only a couple of years. And he continues to do these bizarre things. So he needs help. And it's the kind of help that Tom Brady can't give him, Bruce Arians can't give him, the NFL can't give him.
Yeah, and I was confused because he did not practice Thursday and Friday. Bruce Arians said he wasn't aware that he was hurt, never was brought up to him, and yet he's told to leave. So I'm not really sure where the truth is. There's no question. I agree with you. You only get so many chances. Sooner or later, you gotta cut your losses. You gotta cut the cord. He's unbelievably talented.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Therein lies the tragedy, right? For me.
Oh, yeah. A great route runner, but also his yak, the yards
after catch.
Just tremendous. Great open field runner. He's a terrific weapon. Arians likes a wide open offensive style. They want to give Tom Brady every weapon he possibly can have. You understand why, from a football standpoint, they thought, well, okay, we can roll the dice here, and maybe being under Brady's wing and with a team that's capable of winning the Super Bowl. And he did play for them and make some sort of contribution in the last Super Bowl. Maybe that'll help him straighten out to some extent. But when some problems are so deep-seated as Antonio's apparently are, the superficial stuff is not going to get to the heart of it. For whatever it's worth, when he was with the Steelers, I interviewed him a couple of times for Sunday Night Football. Mm-hmm. At least in those 15 minutes when I sat with him, he was ingratiating. He was endearing. He has a beautiful smile. I liked him, but I had no way, not being around him closely, I had no way of knowing until he began acting out, how troubled he was.
Yeah, he's a walking metaphor for the enabled athlete who lives by different standards, maybe. And you've covered sports for 50 years now, Bob. Have you ever seen anything like this? I just don't remember. I came into the league in '82. I don't remember anything like this ever happening on a football field, in a locker room. Yeah, we had little issues. They were usually handled internally. From a broadcaster standpoint, have you ever covered a story in your 50 years that is as bizarre as the Antonio Brown, or there's a couple of other ones you could throw in there as well?
There have been some that ended in criminality and tragedy. There's Aaron Hernandez, a Tom teammate, as it happens. Terrell Owens had his issues, but this goes beyond anything that Terrell Owens might have done. We're off the field things, Michael Vick. There have been some situations, but since this played out on national television the way it did in a social media era, and since Antonio had a long list of incidents prior to this, you put all of it together cumulatively, still not as bad as what Aaron Hernandez was involved in, but it plays out more graphically for public consumption because it was just all out there the way it was.
Yeah, enough Antonio Brown. Let's talk positive stuff. You got a new show on HBO, Back on the Record. You did 4 shows in 21. I loved them. The great shows. You have Bomani Jones there with you as a second voice. Talk to me about Back on the Record. What made you go back on the record with HBO, having spent 40 years, and we'll talk more about NBC and your journey there. What an incredible journey, 40 years with one network. But talk to me a little bit about your HBO show. I find you to be one of the greatest interviewers really around. And talk to me about that. Number 2, I want to get your take on what makes a good interview.
Well, I wanted to return to HBO because it gives me a chance to do the sorts of things which I've always been interested in. And maybe it's the primary interest I have now at this stage of my life and this stage of my career, which is to do some genuine commentary, not hot takes, not shoot from the hip. I understand why the kind of programming that abounds on FS1 and ESPN, I understand why it exists, but I also find it hard to believe that generally middle-aged men, and that's what we're talking about, generally middle-aged men on those shows are all worked up over half a dozen sports issues a day. I just don't live in that hot take world, even though some of the people who do it are talented and make good points and are sometimes amusing. I'd rather take a step back, find something that I feel like I have something worthwhile to say about, and craft something that expresses down to the comma exactly what I feel on my own terms. So HBO gives you the chance to do that. And also when you sit down and do an interview on HBO, that interview can go 15, 20 minutes. There may even be, depending upon the subject, if we get the right people, an interview that we turn the whole show over to. Maybe you got like 58 minutes with no commercials, so you want to really push it to the limit. You're talking about an hour on HBO. Maybe if you get a dream interview, the kind of interview that everybody wants to see and hear, if you get Barry Bonds or Tiger Woods, and I'm not holding my breath because they have their reasons to politely decline, okay? But if you did, you give the whole show over to them and maybe just do a 5-minute commentary at the end. HBO is geared toward that. Network television has never been geared toward that, except in my case, when I did the late night show on NBC that followed David Letterman in the late 80s and into the mid 90s. And if I have one big professional regret, I never should have left that show when I did. There was so much on my plate, and I was commuting between St. Louis and New York, and my children were young. And if something had to come off the plate, I just thought it was doing a show that aired 4 times a week. There was no Friday show. It was Monday, Thursday. And we used to tape the whole week's worth on Monday, so I could hop on the 7:15 plane from New York back to St. Louis. And then either Friday or Saturday, I'd fly back to New York. This was when I was hosting. Then mix in some of the play-by-play going to different cities, or the Olympics, being gone for stretches during the Olympics. Something had to give. And part of my thinking was, that kids can relate to sports, you know. They can't always relate to the subject matter of a late night show, but they can sure relate to sports. And so they were able to share that part of my career with me. So I wasn't going to take baseball off. I wasn't going to take the NBA on NBC off during the Michael Jordan era. I wasn't going to take the Olympics off. So something had to come off. But Later now has another life, Morten, on YouTube. And people sometimes send me clips of programs, some of which I remember doing, others I don't remember the exact content. And occasionally, sitting around with time on my hands these days, I've watched some of them, and I take a small amount of pride in the quality of it, and also because it was an accurate reflection of what my state of mind, my sensibility was, my interests were. And it's a kind of television that you don't see very much anymore, especially on the networks. But HBO gives me a chance to do at least something like that every now and then, if not nightly, then occasionally on HBO.
Yeah, I find content-driven programming the best. You know, meaning what you just explained and what you just kind of alluded to is a more lengthy dive into somebody's psyche or whatever. And I always felt like you always search deeper than most on what made a guy tick, and you know, why did he embrace the distasteful, and what got him, you know, I talk about this all the time. We improve the most when it's not going well. And especially as athletes in the high performance business, it's easy when your hands are above your head to do whatever, right? And I would imagine it's the same with you in broadcasting interview. There's good ones, there's good interviews, right? And then sometimes you go, man, I wasn't very good there, you know, or I didn't bring the best to my guest. I didn't do him a service. So
it's rare. It's rare, even for someone who's very good at what they do. You know, Sandy Koufax only threw one perfect game. He threw one perfect game. So in some sense, he was imperfect every time. So it's rare when you do something, even if it's very good, where you step back and say, even upon review, I couldn't possibly do this any better. Wouldn't change even a comma. I don't think you're being honest with yourself if that happens too often. It happens now and then you get a real glow from it. But if your average is generally, you know, an A- at least, then you can live with yourself. And I know that people sometimes point to, and I understand it, some of the more newsworthy things or some of the deeper subjects that I've dealt with. But over the years, I think it's been a mixture of lighthearted and serious stuff. Just speaking later, you could literally have someone like Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize-winning Holocaust survivor, which we did. You could have him on one night, and you could have Richard Lewis or Chris Rock or Jerry Seinfeld on the next night. And then the night after that, it might be Willie Mays or Smokey Robinson. It was the texture and the range.
That's a stretch right there, man. That's a stretch. You just ran by me.
That's what it was like. And, you know, when people like to pigeonhole people, this is what they fit into one category.
Do I know that? Do I know that, man?
Sure. But I think that over time, I hit a lot of notes on the scale.
Yeah, I know the pigeonhole, right? He's only a kicker. Well, he's just a kicker.
And not an athlete, right?
He's a specialist, you know. Last time I checked, the leading scorers in the history of the game there's a K after their name.
Well, and you know, one of the things that happens, and I hope you look at it this way, when Adam Vinatieri passes you,
well, he did.
I know, yes. Yeah, when he did, you are then brought up to a new generation. Or what you did is reminded, people are reminded, if they remember it in the first place, they're reminded of what you did. So in that sense, I hope you feel good about it, that somebody who's headed for the Hall of Fame himself to join you there. Adam Vinatieri is going to join you and Jan Stenerud and Ray Guy. Very few kickers are in the Hall of Fame. Right. He's going to join you, you know, and you'll be up there probably, and you're wearing your gold jacket. That's a great fraternity. It's an elite group.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun little happy hour. I'm not going to lie about that. And then we'll have and then in 10, 15 years, we'll have Justin Tucker.
Wow.
He'll definitely be there.
He is unbelievable. And as you may know, on top of it all, he's an opera singer.
I know it. I did a piece with him. He's great. He's a great human being, and fun to watch. Taking the thing to a whole nother level, which you did, Bob. What makes a good interviewer? I'm learning this, right? You got to listen. So from my standpoint, being brand new at this, fairly new at this, got to listen. And then I can have a script about you, and I can go and research, but really, I'm going to just riff with you because I want to take it, and correct me if I'm completely off base here. Whatever you're telling me, I'm just going to work off of that and then work the themes in.
Yeah.
Where are you?
Preparation.
Yeah.
Curiosity, a natural curiosity, and listening. If you've just got a list of questions and you're going to pose question 3 after question 2 because that's the way you've got it in your head, and someone says something interesting that needs to be challenged or followed up or elaborated upon after question 2, if you can't go there spontaneously with the person, then you can't possibly be a good interviewer. Yeah. You have to be willing to at least politely pose tough questions, but I think it also helps, depending upon what the subject matter is and what the tone is, if you're empathetic. And being empathetic is not necessarily the same thing as rolling over and just tossing softballs, but recognizing even people who've made mistakes or had controversies or have to be held to account. Very few of them are irredeemably awful people. Yes. They're like all of us. They're flawed. They have their triumphs and their regrets. And if you can't be aware of that, then you're gonna, you're not a prosecutor in most cases. No. There have been a few where I might have approximated that and it might have been appropriate. You're not a prosecutor. You're not an interrogator so much as a questioner. And the tone of those questions varies depending upon the subject matter and the subject, him or herself, and how they're responding and what their life story is.
Yeah, I want to try to be a catalyst, a facilitator of deep conversation. I want to get my subject matter. This is what I'm very curious about as an interviewer, and what I've found fascinating through now over a year of doing this. And I love the platform, not unlike HBO, albeit with a smaller following. But having this long format where there's no time limit, really, it's strictly depending on the vibe and how it goes. But to be able to get a subject matter, get somebody to talk about things where he or she is vulnerable, yet not feeling threatened, but vulnerable in a place where he or she will open up and give us gold nuggets, man. That's got to be for you too. What we're trying to get.
A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, the best moments in an interview come not so much from the specific question or the specific give and take, but from the tone and the connection that has been established. And then it looks like the interviewer isn't doing anything, and the person just decided to give this up. But the atmosphere that has been created leads to that. That was part, I think, of what worked so well for later. Even the set and the way the set was lit, it was designed to be a late night show after Johnny Carson, after David Letterman, 1:30 in the morning on the East and West Coast. It was designed that way. It was designed to feel relaxed. There wasn't a studio audience. There weren't, however, the technicians, the camera people, the stage managers, they were encouraged to laugh if someone said something funny. The whole vibe of it, once the person sat down, was different. And then once some level of trust, again, trust is different than sycophancy. Once some level of trust and mutual respect has been established, and part of that is if you do it for a while and people respect and appreciate what you do, they come with some appreciation. Before they sit down, they have some appreciation and understanding of what this is going to be like. And then if that connection happens in the first 10 minutes, it's likely that the next 10 minutes are going to be better than the first 10. And sometimes it just looks like you're standing there and good luck came your way, but you had something more subtle to do with it by creating the atmosphere in which the interview subject delivered.
I was a big fan of Snyder, late night.
Yeah, I loved
with Snyder. I thought he was that vibe to me.
In a different way, you know?
Yeah, but in a conversation.
Different people, but it's the same idea. We got to the same place in different ways, but it's the same idea.
Who do you want to sit down? You've sat down with so many, but who have you done where you said, man, this was a great interview. This is something, you know, I know. It's not, it's tough.
So many. You know, if we confine it to sports,
sure.
There aren't too many out there that where the slate is clean, pretty much, because everyone is more or less available now, even if it's through social media, even if they're doing it on their own terms.
Yeah.
Something's lost and something's gained there. There may be additional access to some content if people are feeding it all through social media. And I understand why people want to control their own message and not subject themselves to sound bites and clickbait and all the rest. But if they never sit down with a fair and well-informed interviewer, you're never going to get all the great television moments that we had through the years. But going back, Ted Williams had not appeared on American television or radio for like a quarter of a century. He hit a home run in his last time at bat in 1960. He managed the Washington Senators for a while, and maybe for 1 year they became the Texas Rangers. And then, as still a relatively young guy, 50 or whatever he was, he walked away from it and he was just fishing in the Florida Keys and being Ted Williams. And I was able to get an interview with him on the radio in either 1988 or 89. And at that time, he had not been heard from for a very long time. And the world was different when he played. There was a mystique. Not every game was on television. Very few were. In fact, television didn't exist when he broke in. So there was a more of a distance and more mystique. So now he comes in and sits down for a 2-hour radio interview with me on the old Costas Coast to Coast radio show. And again, Morten, the landscape dictates some of this. There's so much content now. All sports radio didn't even exist until the late 1980s. So it barely existed then. I did a 2-hour syndicated show on Sunday nights when there was no Sunday night football. There wasn't any Sunday night baseball. You didn't have single sport networks covering all 4 major team sports. You couldn't stream everything and watch everything. So the landscape was different. And when people said or heard Ted Williams is going to be on for 2 hours on the radio, heard on some 300 stations around the country, this was kind of an event, not because of me, but because of him. So much so that Boston sports writers listened to it as if it was a news event and then wrote about it the next day. Awesome. And Ted came in and he had such presence about him, the kind of person you can think of others. If you didn't know who he was, you didn't know anything about baseball, but they have such presence. He walks in the room and you would say, if you didn't know a sacrifice fly from a squeeze bunt, who's that? That's somebody. It's got to be somebody, you know? And then he sits down and he was so forthcoming. And this is often the way this happens. Tony Kubek, who was my partner on the game of the week, baseball game of the week in the 80s, vouched for me to Ted. Mickey Mantle vouched for me to Ted. A lot of guys, old school guys like that, they operate on trust. You have to, you got to pass some kind of test. Who knows what the test is, but you got to pass the test in their mind. I can respect this guy. I can trust this guy. And wherever he wants to go, I'll go there with him. And so I was able, why didn't you tip your cap? Do you ever did stuff that you regretted? Could you have been better in this situation or that? So it was some questions like that, but mostly just a chance to give him a chance to reflect on his career. And late in the interview, I said to him, you're the guy that John Wayne used to portray as John Wayne, except those were movies. You really are that guy. And Ted was so honest that for a moment I saw him pause, like it was running through his head. Should I construct some kind of humble response to that? But then his honesty got the better of him. So I said, you're the guy, you're in real life. You are the guy John Wayne played in all those movies. And he goes, yeah, I know it. And it was just, you had to be there, but it was just a moment. But that moment came out of the 90 minutes that preceded.
Sure. He was uncomfortable, perhaps, with it.
Well, he got comfortable talking with me. So I've talked around your question.
No, it's fine.
Ted Williams was a guy.
Yeah.
Sandy Koufax now, it's still in baseball. But I respect the fact that Sandy believes that there is nothing he can say. He's a genuinely private and shy and humble person. That's genuine, it's not a pose. And there's also nothing he can add. What he did speaks for itself. It was elegant, it was incredible. So he doesn't want to talk about himself, and I respect that. The only time I ever got Sandy to sit down was I invited him to sit down with Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, and Johnny Bench. And I said, Sandy, it's about the four of you. It's not about you alone. And not only did he do it, oh, incredible room, Mount Rushmore room. Not only did he do it, he was great. Just his observations and his demeanor was great. Now, I really think that Barry Bonds is somebody that people would like to hear from. He's a very intelligent guy. His baseball IQ is a genius level. But apart from that, he's an intelligent guy, period. He has an interesting and yet controversial biography. Mm-hmm. This is last year on the Hall of Fame ballot, and it comes up later this month as to whether he, Curt Schilling, and Roger Clemens make it, or whether they wind up having to wait for some kind of veterans committee. There's a lot to talk.
What's your feeling on that? What's your feeling on Bonds and Clemens and the Hall of Fame?
I used to think that they had a good chance to inch over that 75% barrier, but they haven't advanced enough in the last couple of years. They're in the low 60s right now. And the only way that it can happen, and there's no way to read the minds of the some 400 baseball writers who vote on this, but if some of them were thinking, you know what, I'm going to let them twist in the wind until the last year. I'm going to withhold my vote until the last year, and now I'll vote for it. Or because A-Rod and David Ortiz are on the ballot for the first time this year, and David showed up on some kind of survey testing thing and no other time, and baseball has said it could have been a false positive. But A-Rod, for all his greatness, we know, now has acknowledged that he used performance-enhancing drugs, and he was suspended for a full year. If any of these guys intend at any point to vote for Ortiz and or Rodriguez, and if they assume that there are some guys in the Hall of Fame who we can reasonably assume used PEDs, maybe they'll wave the white flag and just say, yeah, well, we can't keep Clemens and Bonds out. You can keep Manny Ramirez out. You can keep Mark McGwire out, because whatever their achievements were, they're not in the inner circle. You know, if the Hall of Fame was confined to 24 people, that would include Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, especially Bonds. So there's an argument to be made in that way. And the other guy is Curt Schilling, also in his last year. And Schilling's problem is more his pronouncements that have nothing to do with baseball that rub people the wrong way. But I've always said, I know Curt pretty well, and I'm friendly with him. He and I could not be more different politically. But I've said from day one, I would have voted for him if I had a vote in the first year. He was a Hall of Fame pitcher, and I think he should be in.
You have 29 Emmys. You did 12 Olympics, Sunday Night Football, Major League Baseball, boxing. What am I missing here, Bob?
Yeah,
I'm sure I'm missing a sport.
Not too much boxing. Four or five boxing.
Well, you and Al Michaels had a little something, didn't you?
Oh yeah, the NBD cool thing. They had a boxing thing at Madison Square Garden, and I think it was Madison Square Garden. In any case, Marv Albert, who called a lot of boxing, they wanted to bring me, Marv, and Al together on one broadcast, and we did. We each had our own roles, and that was that one time. But at HBO in the early 2000s, I hosted a lot of nights where Roy Jones Jr. fought, where Oscar De La Hoya fought, and Bernard Hopkins and Floyd Mayweather, that kind of thing. But wasn't the blow-by-blow guy. Jim Lampley was the blow-by-blow guy. I did a little bit of golf. I hosted a little bit of golf. You went Ryder Cup, that kind of stuff for NBC. And I really enjoyed the Triple Crown horse races, the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness and the Belmont. I enjoyed that too.
I've been to the Derby one time with my wife in the seersucker suit, and she had a big hat on. And man, it was one of my bucket lists for sure.
It's a
Dude, the Friday Oaks was fantastic. And then the Saturday Derby, man.
Slice of Americana. Bear with me. I'm gonna show you something here that you might.
All right, let's go. Let's do it. Bob Costas has left the room, everyone.
Oh no! I thought I had it. Wait a second.
What were you looking for? Get me a beer while you're there, Bob.
Here we go. Here we go. Hop back up on my little chair.
Yeah. What do you got, bud? Let's see it.
A lovely keepsake from one of the derbies I did.
Oh, let me see that. Talk Derby to me. I love it. That's great. Black coffee only in that thing, man. Let's go. Yeah, a little green tea.
Transfer the.
Or mint julep. A mint julep.
If I'd known we were going to go there, it would have been. There you go.
Hey, we'll go everywhere. How about the mint julep? That's a rough drink, man. I know it's tradition, but it's too sweet.
Way too sweet. Oh my God. It's like, you get a sugar.
Oh, yeah. I can't do it, man. Heart palpitations right off the bat. But the Derby, what a fantastic experience.
Yeah, it's great.
I remember, but I come back to the Olympics, Bob. I mean, the Olympic experience and watching the Olympics with you, unbelievable. And what a big show to keep track of. How do you rein all that? How do you make sense of that shit show, to put it bluntly?
One piece of advice from the late, great Jim McKay was helpful. He reminded me, look, yes, it's a sports event, a big sports event, but it's unlike any other. It's like a 3-week mini series. And yes, it's a competition, but it's also a travel log. People want to know about the host city, the host nation, some of the sites, some of the history. It's a travel log. It's a cultural panorama, no question about that. And then I came to realize after the first couple I did that no matter how diligently you study, nobody can possibly know every athlete, especially at the Summer Olympics. You got like 200 nations and some 10,000 athletes. That's what the people at the specific venue are there for. It's the job of the host to be a really good generalist, to know the important history of the Olympics, to know something about the host city and the host nation, and to get the broad strokes right, to know the 24 or so storylines that are likely to play out over the course of the Olympics and be really well informed about those. But at the same time, and this is something you can't prepare for, you have to have this ability and then further cultivate it, which is to be nimble enough. If something unexpected happens, you can pivot. You got to be able to take a briefing quickly and ad lib. One of the things I would pride myself on, and I think Mike Tirico probably has this facility as well, some of what you do at an Olympics, especially if it's a taped Olympics, can be written. It can be in a teleprompter. But if you can't ad lib and pull stuff together off the top of your head, then you can't be a good Olympic host. And one example of that I can think of in 2000 in Sydney, Rulon Gardner won an unexpected wrestling gold medal.
I remember.
The Russian competitor, and why his name is escaping me now, thankfully it didn't 22 years ago.
Something that ends with ski.
Yeah, but kind of. He was beyond formidable. He trained in Siberia, like carrying gigantic, like railroad tie logs and schlepping through knee-deep snow to strengthen himself. And not only did he win every match, but people were literally afraid to go up against him. He was thought to be complete. Alexander Karelin was his name. And
oh, buddy.
So it didn't end in an SKI. But anyway, somehow Gardner defeats this guy. Now, Gardner was from Wyoming. He's an American athlete, but he wasn't on my radar.
No.
Well, when this happened, I turned to the researchers, and without them, you're toast.
Oh.
The researchers are great. And I turned to them, give me what you got on Rulon Gardner. So I look at it. He's won, but they're still doing a ceremony. They're wrapping it up. We're going to go to a commercial. And I kind of ingested as much of this as I could. And then you got to be able to spin it into some kind of coherent narrative and then put it in some kind of place among the unexpected events in Olympic history. Do you compare this beyond that? Do you compare it to the Jets beating the Colts in Super Bowl III? Is it that kind of upset? Where does it fit? So you have to have, it's not the most important thing in the world, but it helps when you're doing this job. You have to have that ability. All the preparation in the world would not have helped because you couldn't have anticipated it. But whatever I brought to it from my previous years at the Olympics and previous years covering sports, then I was able to take those nuggets of information and spin it into something that made sense. But
there were times, I'm sure, where you go, wow, what do I do with this thing? Let's face it, in Denmark, okay, we're very good at rowing, sailing. Winter Olympics, we're great at curling. Summer Olympics, badminton, and cycling. Those are our 5 biggest events right there in the Olympics. So I would venture to guess you probably didn't call a Danish athlete's name or a discipline very much in your 12 Olympics.
Now and then for sure.
Yeah.
And you had to have some little nugget of information during the opening ceremonies when they came in.
With the flag.
Also be aware of when you're doing the Olympics is there are certain events that are a big deal in that part of the world. Americans kind of get a chuckle out of race walking. Like I said at one Olympics, good-naturedly, isn't having a contest to see who can walk the fastest kind of like having a competition to see who can whisper the loudest? After a while, don't you just start talking?
I like that.
After a while, don't you just start running? Now the handful of race walking devotees in America got pissed off at me.
Of course.
But I meant no harm. But
it's funny.
Keep in mind, like you said, race walking is a big deal in Romania and in parts of Eastern Europe. Badminton is a big deal in Denmark, but it's also huge in Pakistan and in India. Table tennis or ping pong is
China,
big.
Malaysia. Come on.
Huge. See,
it's billions of people are playing ping pong.
Correct. You got to have an appreciation of that.
Yeah, I wish sometimes American media would cover a little bit more of the world sports. I know we have to cater to the American taste, and that we get a big dose of track and field and gymnastics. But how about some team handball? I mean,
what I always advocate, and out of context, this may seem like a criticism of NBC, but in the big picture, my admiration for what NBC did in the way they produced all these Olympics, the beautiful cinematography, the wide swath of events they were able to cover. You'd have to be at the center of it to appreciate what the challenge was and how close they came to perfectly acing those challenges. But one of the things that I kept suggesting, and they never did, I wanted like a 5 to 6 minute, well-paced, well-produced digest of the stuff that happened beyond the handful of events that draw the big eyeballs in prime time.
I agree.
You were talking about. And it could be great achievements. It could be quirky stuff. It could be funny stuff. It was sort of like a little of this and a little of that from around the Olympics. And I would help to write it, and I would voice it and deliver it. And I just thought that would be a really good addition to the other stuff that we did. In fairness, NBC now, because of the additional platforms, you've got the main NBC in prime time, but you got a half dozen other places, plus you got the internet and all the streaming stuff. If you really want to see team handball, you really want to see water polo, you can in real time. Yeah. But still, even with a changed media landscape, the primary way the vast majority of Americans get it is in flagship network television.
Linear television, for sure.
In prime time. Yeah. And I just thought we could have added that element in prime time, but I never won that argument.
Do you have a favorite Olympics? I don't want to spend too much time here on Olympics because there's a couple other things I want to get to, but do you have a favorite where you go, man, that was a cool spot. That was a great city. That was a great host.
Yeah. Barcelona was my first Olympics as the primetime host. I'd been the late night host in '88 in Seoul, Korea. Brian Gumbel was the primetime host. Because Barcelona is a fascinating city, a romantic kind of old world European city, it was a great setting and it was exhilarating. I was obviously much younger then, we were all younger when this interview started.
You're looking good, Bob. You're looking good, brother.
So anyway, the exhilaration of the experience, and it turned out well for me. So that will always have a place on my list. 96 in Atlanta, the single moment that I treasure the most is Muhammad Ali lighting the Olympic cauldron in the ceremony. So unexpected and so beautifully staged, and goosebump raising even now. Sydney down under, they did a hell of a job. Athens in 2004, because of my Greek heritage. My father's side of the family is 100% Greek. His parents came over from Greece. They were Ellis Island people. And of course, it's the birthplace of the Olympics. So that was a big one for me. Yeah. You know, they all had something to recommend themselves. But I guess, you know, it's like the music you like when you were a kid, or first love. That first primetime Olympics really still resonates with me.
It's an interview that was, what's your toughest interview you've done where you go, man, this guy's rough.
You know,
or this girl's rough for that matter.
You know, a lot of times people think that the hardest interviews are the most contentious ones. So I had a contentious one that people still talk about with Vince McMahon. I was asking him some tough questions. He didn't like it. Vince has a volatile temper. I wasn't the first one that he ever went off on. Armin Katay, who's a great reporter, he slapped his notes out of his hand on another occasion because he didn't like the line of questioning. But that was not that difficult an interview, at least not for me, because I knew it was interesting. I knew it was good television. It was on HBO, so there were no commercials. So we just pressed on, and people still talk about it. So that's fine. When I interviewed Jerry Sandusky, when the Penn State scandal was just beginning to break, it was a mistake for him to come on. He and his lawyer made a mistake by agreeing to come on. But I asked the pertinent questions, the fair questions. It was kind of a tightrope walk, but really, so people remember those. And I guess it's, in a certain sense, more difficult than most to get those right. But the ones that are really hard are the ones where the person is just unresponsive. The boring interviews are the hard ones, where you got to really work to get the person to give you anything worthwhile, especially if it's live. You know, if it's taped, if the guy gives you 5 or 6 good minutes and that's all you need, and it takes you 20 minutes of digging in the, excavating to get it, okay. But if it's live and they're giving you nothing, ooh.
It's rough, That's why I'm hoping to have you here for 2 hours, Bob.
Bored is way worse than antagonism. Way worse.
Oh, you're so right about that. Let's talk baseball first. Did Ken Rosenthal, did he get a raw deal with MLB Network? He said some things about Commissioner Manfred, and they were mildly controversial. I don't know. What's your take on that whole thing?
I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I do know this. Ken is universally liked and respected. He does his job extremely well, and he does it with integrity. He's noted for fairness and for accuracy and credibility and professionalism. So whatever led to this parting, I think it's a loss. MLBN has a very strong on-air lineup. And when we talk about just that area, Tom Verducci, Joel Sherman, John Heyman, JP Morosi, they're all great. But it's like losing another power bat from the lineup. It's not like the lineup therefore is weak, but I think it was stronger with Ken there. Too bad.
Yeah, he's a talented guy, man, and some great takes. I'm not a huge baseball aficionado. I love my Braves winning, obviously, this year. That was fantastic. The Braves got it done, and they got it. I don't know if they've re-signed Freeman. I'm hoping that we get him back, but you follow it a lot. Where's baseball headed, and are you happy with how it's going? I mean, you got a work stoppage. If you're the commissioner, let's put the commissioner hat on. Where are we with baseball in the future here?
Well, they're going to work out the economic issues, and I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds with that. There's plenty of revenue in the game. The players' concerns are that some teams are not trying as hard as they might to be as competitive as they possibly could be, on the theory that it's better to accumulate the draft choices and try and get to where you can catch lightning in a bottle. When your team sort of peaks, when young players peak for a 2 or 3 year period before they're free agency eligible, some of them before they're arbitration eligible, where you can keep the costs down and then have it all come together at a certain time. And they think that the top end has nothing to worry about. Max Scherzer's making $43 million a year. The top end is doing better than ever before, but the middle is being squeezed because analytics and the way the game is going economically has teams saying, you know what? The veteran guy, the 265 hitting, dependable guy with 20 homers and 75 RBIs, making $8 million a year. We'd rather put that money toward what it takes to pay Max Scherzer and replace those numbers pretty much with somebody who is an arbitration eligible, who's playing for $1 million or less. I think a lot of people would be interested to know that more than half the players in the majors this past year made less than $1 million. Now, I'm not saying, oh, poor them. That's a darn good wage. You make $800,000 a year or $500,000 a year. That's a darn good wage. But the average player, when you talk about the average salary, well, Max Scherzer's salary is pulling up all the guys making $600,000-$700,000. But the average guy is not making 7 figures and certainly not making 8 figures. So the players want to figure out a way where the good veteran player, the middle class player, is compensated better. But they'll get through that. And I already violated my own proviso that I wasn't going to talk too much.
That's okay. I'm glad you did.
But here's in the big picture for fans, it's what happens to the game itself. Baseball has always had a pace that differentiated itself to its benefit from other sports. There's no clock. It's supposed to have a pleasing, leisurely pace. But now, too often, it has a lethargic pace, which would be bad enough. If games were taking 3.5, 4 hours in 1962, that would be bad enough. But in 1962, you didn't have 500 or 5,000 entertainment options. You didn't have people's attention span having been reduced by what they're holding in their hand. And this is so out of step with the kind of metabolism of the culture that baseball has got to go back to the future. Its best future lies behind it, not by going back to wool uniforms and, people coming on trolley cars and women getting in for a quarter on Ladies' Day. That's not what I'm talking about. Every sport has to modernize. But when we talk about pace and the ball being in play, baseball needs to go back to the kind of equilibrium and appropriate balance between pitching and offense that it had in the 80s and 90s, as opposed to what it has now.
Yeah, I mean, the long games. I mean, the intentional walk, so that speeds it up. What about are you in favor of the clock on the pitcher per pitch?
Yeah, before I address that, the idea of the intentional walk, where they just point to first base, that almost just points out their problem. On average, there's only one intentional walk per game. Both teams combined, on average. So now here's what we're saying: we can't fix the rest of it. The game with the same score that used to take 2.5 hours now takes 4 hours. But we're going to save 45 seconds by pointing to first base and having this guy down there. And it actually diminishes the drama. When you think about an intentional walk, at least in some situations, okay, we're going to intentionally walk Freddie Freeman because we want to pitch to the next guy and set up a double play. Now the fans in Atlanta are booing. Now you look at Freddie Freeman, right? Now you look at the manager, they cut to the manager and what's going through their heads. And now the guy in the on-deck circle, it's going to be up to him. They just dissed me. I'm going to walk up there and show them they made a mistake. That's part of the drama of baseball. Yeah. Those 45 seconds are better spent with 4 pitches high and wide while you think about the gears that are turning on the strategy.
I like that.
When it comes to pace of play and the running game, stealing bases, going from first to third on a single, scoring from first on a double, the ball being in play. That's what baseball needs more of. And to answer your question, I definitely favor a pitch clock with no one on base. With someone on base, I think it's problematic because guys on first base, okay, he's a base stealer. You throw
picked off,
throw over there. Well, now you got to deliver. Now the guy knows you got to deliver. The clock is ticking. He takes off.
Yeah.
So I think a pitch clock with no one on base is
that makes sense.
idea.
I like that. You spent 40 years, Bob, NBC, and we're not gonna talk about the exit. It doesn't matter. What's more important really is the volume that you had there. And what's your take on NBC and where NBC Sports is heading now that invested so heavily in Peacock and of course NBC, the network, one of them folded. So
BCSN, which was
SN, the sports network,
sister sports network has disappeared. But I guess some of the programming that would have been there just gets repurposed to Peacock or something. I don't know. I'm not close enough to it to know all the nouns. But I really respect and empathize with my old friends and colleagues there. They got to do a Super Bowl next month under COVID circumstances, which is going to cut down on some of the pageantry, I would think, and create logistical problems. And then they got to do yet another COVID Olympics in China with all the controversy and all the issues. And apart from covering those issues, it's not fun. The people that were in Japan last summer, it's not fun. You're confined to your hotel most of the time. There's all kinds of protocols. You're being tested constantly. It's not the kind of Olympic experience that I was lucky enough to enjoy so many times. And it's easy certainly I've been one who through the years has said, we need to acknowledge some of the issues in sports, including in the Olympics. But in fairness to NBC, this is a tough needle to thread because you don't know, Morten, what the Chinese might do. You know how they react to criticism. Even when the criticism is mild, they respond right away. You don't know. I don't think they would do anything drastic, but they might make things uncomfortable for NBC if NBC's coverage of all the various issues, especially human rights, involved in China. Could they cut the cord? Could they make it uncomfortable or put obstacles to doing what is already a difficult job in front of the NBC people? It's gonna be tough. And I think what will happen is that people who do not have billions and billions of dollars invested in it and don't have to handle all of these challenges, including the safety of thousands of people employed by NBC and all their problems, the medical problems, the logistical problems. They don't have to face all that. It'll be easy for them to say, why didn't NBC do this? Why didn't NBC do that?
Sure.
That doesn't mean that all the criticisms are invalid, but it's easy to be cynical about it when you don't have billions and billions of dollars invested and when it's not your ass that's on the line and not all thousands of people that you're responsible for.
No, I agree with that. And let's stop with some playoffs. NFL playoffs, man, are coming. The postseason, the most exciting time of the year, I think. I'm, of course, rooting for my Saints here to try to get it done and then need a little help from the Rams, and we'll be in as the 7th seed. I just want to get some quick hits from you, some playoff-bound teams here, and whatever comes to mind, Bob, you can just give me your wisdom on each of these teams. And I got a few names too that you worked with. I want to get your opinion on that little name game. So some quick hitters on some playoff teams, a name game, and we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Can't say the Chiefs.
Well, the Chiefs really were sputtering at the beginning of the year, but this past weekend's loss notwithstanding, they pulled it together. So they're a big time threat. And I don't follow it nearly as closely as I once did, but if Patrick Mahomes' offensive line is intact, which it wasn't, it was in tatters when they played in the Super Bowl last year against the Bucs, who have a very, very good pass rush. If that offensive line is intact, any team that has Patrick Mahomes on it is in good shape. On the other hand, that loss likely cost them home field. If they face the Titans, they're going to Nashville.
Yes.
Kansas City.
That's right. Just to put it in perspective, in the Super Bowl against the Bucs, the Chiefs, Mahomes scrambled for 600 yards. In other words, without throwing a forward pass, he ran around for 600 yards.
I didn't know.
Unbelievable.
It makes sense having watched
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then my preseason favorites for Super Bowl was Packers and Bills. And here we are, and the Bills are going to be in. They'll be a lower seed, but the Packers, man, they're still looking pretty good. What's your take on the Packers and Aaron Rodgers?
Aaron Rodgers has been involved in some controversy this year, but the following statement is not controversial. Aaron Rodgers is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. The NFL did their 100 recently, and those shows were great with Bill Belichick and Chris Collinsworth and Rich Eisen, and they bring in some of the people who had made the list. That sounds like candy to me. I can watch all those retrospective shows forever. And they picked the top 10 quarterbacks, and every one of them was worthy. But Aaron Rodgers is as good or better than some of the people on that list. I thought Aaron Rodgers and Fran Tarkenton, considering his accomplishments, were the biggest omissions. Not criticizing anybody who made it. Aaron Rodgers, touchdowns to interceptions, his touch on the ball, the variety of throws he's able to make with pinpoint accuracy. He is absolutely a marvel. And now it all goes through Green Bay, which isn't it isn't just any home field advantage. Exactly. That's what it is. Nobody wants to go there. No.
I played there in January, Bob. I played there one time in a playoff game, and the field is heated, and you get to the sidelines, everything's frozen. So if you're running out of bounds, it's like ice skates.
The elements really matter. You can understand why people, like dome stadiums, people don't want to shiver and risk. Yeah, sure. And of course, inside, that probably, how much did that increase your range kicking inside?
It didn't increase the range, but you didn't have the wind to deal with, and you didn't have a surface that was unstable, like when you go to Soldier Field and your foot slides a couple of feet because it's sandy and wet and muddy. So that part, the most important thing for us as kickers is the plant. That's the moment of truth. You're in the right spot, and that thing has to be stable. And so if you get that, you should be able to recreate.
But I think just from the standpoint of theater, the elements sometimes create theater.
Oh yeah.
The ice bowl, is part of NFL lore. And I don't know about you, when you mentioned Soldier Field, most of my coverage of football has been as the host. Although on Sunday Night Football, we did it from the site. And I'd be out there for 2 hours, no matter what the weather was. And I always found that the wind was much more important than what the mercury read. So 5 degrees in Green Bay, and I've experienced that, was not as bad as 15 or 20 degrees at Arrowhead, because the wind comes off the plains and it's brutal. Out there in a parking lot. There's nothing to stop it. It cuts right through you. And Soldier Field, when it was 20, with that wind coming off Lake Michigan in December, that was worse than if it was 0 in Green Bay. Not that it's
playing in Arrowhead, which I did for 2 years. There's nothing to stop that wind coming from the Rockies. So it starts at the Rockies and it goes right across the breadbasket of America, and there's nothing in its way. And it comes right through Arrowhead, man, and it's blowing. It's a wild sensation. So
I'll tell you a story just because it's a podcast, and
it's fine.
We don't have a time limit, I guess. When I was doing play-by-play before I became the host on NBC, so around 1981 or 82, I'm doing a game at Soldier Field with Bob Trumpy, the Bengals tight end. And Trump was a chain smoker. It was a very cold December day, and there was a space heater on the floor at Soldier Field. And he's got his overcoat on, and he's over here, closer to the space heater. And he's puffing away, and he's making his observations. And all of a sudden I look, and the bottom of his coat has caught on fire from the space heater. And the flames appear to be inching up toward his butt. And it was early in my career. Later, I would have blurted something out and made a joke out of it. And I'm just gesturing, Trump, look, your damn coat is on fire. And finally, the stage manager pulled it off of him and threw it in the corner. And then a couple of guys are stamping on it to stamp the fire out. And he just kept on going.
I had an incident in Green Bay, actually. We had these space heaters. They were like rockets, and they were just shooting out intense heat. I put my kicking shoe in front of it, and the plastic rubber bottom melted. The cleats melted right off. started smoldering. I go, that's steam. That's hot meeting cold. No, that was smoke, man. That the bottom of my kicking shoe was on fire. So,
Frank Gifford was part of the broadcast team for the Ice Bowl. Ray Scott and Jack Buck and Frank Gifford were the announcers. And Frank had an incredible line. They brought him a cup of hot coffee. He put it on the ledge because you can't call the game through the window. You can't close the window. No. You got to open it up so you can see what the hell's going on. And so Frank takes his cup and he puts it on the ledge, like for one series of downs. And then he says, "Excuse me, Jack, while I take a bite out of my coffee."
I love it. Man. That's hilarious. Does Tom Brady, does he repeat?
Got a shot. Got a shot.
Yeah.
All the way through, it almost seems because he's won so often, he's been to 10 Super Bowls and won 7 of them. It almost seems preordained. But when you think about all those Super Bowls, every one was close.
Yeah.
The one against the Rams was kind of dreary, but almost every one could have gone either way. Could have won them all, could have lost many of them. Last year in the title game in Green Bay, looked to me like the Packers could have and should have won that game, which would have circuited the Bucs from getting there. So they've always got a shot. But I wouldn't make them prohibitive favorites just because it's Tom Brady and just because they're the defending champions.
Bob, you worked with some of the greatest. You've known some of the greatest. Let me talk about 5 or 6 guys, and then we'll call it a day. The late, great John Madden. What comes to mind when I say John Madden to you?
Well, apart from what has been said repeatedly over the past week or so,
to you,
how iconic he was, and how he was simultaneously a true everyman, but sui generis, completely unique, simultaneously. He was genuine. There was no real difference, except maybe amplification, between the John Madden on the air and the John Madden off the air. He made the game accessible and understandable to the average fan, but he also transmitted joy and enjoyment. Personally, my only real personal, although John and I were friendly through the years, the connection was that in 1979, his first year out of coaching, CBS wanted him to audition. And so I was 27 years old, and they called me in just to provide the framework of the play-by-play. I had done a handful of regional games for CBS. I was just a kid knocking around, hoping to find a spot. And I'd do 4 or 5 regional games a year for them on small regional situations, not the big games. And so Vin Scully was doing the main game. It was the 49ers and Rams at the old Coliseum. I think he was with Hank Stram, maybe Stram and Jim Brown. Could have been a 3-man booth, doesn't matter. So we're in the next booth next to them, and we're doing it into a monitor or off a monitor, same feed they were getting, but it wasn't going anywhere except into a tape, which the CBS people would evaluate. And that was actually the first game that John ever did. And very nervous, and he wasn't at all sure that he wanted this to be his career. But I could tell by the end of the first quarter that if this guy wanted to, I couldn't have predicted everything, but that if this guy wanted to, he could be a very good broadcaster in his own way, which he was.
Al Michaels.
Al, everything Al has ever done, he's done extremely well. And part of it is intelligence. Al is just a very smart guy. He's a very aware guy. And through the years, he has acquired a really good sense. I think he had it innately, and he's developed it, a sense of the pace and rhythm of an event and how much is needed and when it's needed. He seems to be in sync with the flow of an event. And he has what not all of us have. It's not enough just to be good. You have to have the moment when the man and the moment meet. And very often, very early in his career, that moment happened. Do you believe in miracles?
Yes.
And one thing about that seems obvious, but I'm surprised people don't cite it more often. A network broadcaster is very different from a local broadcaster. The local broadcaster is expected to reflect more excitement when his team does well, especially if they're playing at home. The network broadcasters should reflect the excitement of the moment, but not be any more excited for one team than the other. Sometimes fans misperceive that if your voice raises more because the home team does something, because you have to get above the crowd. But apart from that, you shouldn't be on one side or the other. But that moment in the Olympics was that rarest of moments on network television where your entire audience was rooting for the same thing. In the Super Bowl, when it gets there, half the audience is going to be rooting for one team, half for the other, either based on actual rooting interest or who they bet on or whatever the heck it is. But in that moment in Lake Placid, not only was it an extraordinary upset and a really exciting one-goal game, and it was on home ice. It was in Lake Placid. It wasn't, in Denmark someplace. No, it wasn't. Everybody watching it had the same emotion at the same time. And on television, your job is to put a perfect caption, if you can come up with it, a perfect caption beneath a picture that already exists. As Vin Scully has put it, on radio, they give you a blank canvas and you paint the whole picture. But on television, the picture's there. Your job is to augment the picture. And it wasn't just, do you believe in miracles? It was the timing. If you watch the tape of that, the puck comes out to center ice. So at that point, there's no time for the Soviets to regroup and even get a shot on goal. That allows Al to hit the countdown. You got 5 seconds. And then when it's clear, he says, do you believe in miracles? Slight pause. Yes. And that yes coincides with the American players raising their sticks. And the sticks almost serve as an exclamation point after the yes. So a transcript of what he said does not do justice to the way what he said in timing matched the visual. He got in and he got out at exactly the right time. And that perfect sense of timing has typified Al Michaels' entire career.
You're getting me goosebumps right here, Bob, man. That was really well clarified. Never heard it that way. Totally makes sense to me. All right. Mike Tirico.
Mike Tirico and I go back to 1987. I established a scholarship at Syracuse University, my alma mater, and the alma mater of dozens and dozens of prominent sportscasters. And he was the first winner of it. And my stipulation was that it has to be someone in the Newhouse School of Broadcasting there with a primary interest in sports. And so when they picked Mike, who was the right choice, when the people there picked him, I went up to Syracuse to meet him. And as Mike remembers it, maybe I said this, I want to make sure that the recipient isn't a knucklehead. So I knew that Mike was destined for great things. And his 25 or so years at ESPN proved that. When I told NBC that I was going to give up the Olympics after 2016 and also Sunday Night Football, I told them that in 2012. And they asked me if I wanted to revisit it. And in 2015, I told them, no, same idea. I'm done after 2016. They did a very smart thing. Mike Tirico was the right person to be positioned to succeed me as the host of the Olympics and eventually Al as the play-by-play man of Sunday Night Football. Whoever was the second best choice for those two roles combined on NBC would have been closer to the 10th best choice than the first. Wow. Mike has all the requisite qualities to do both of those jobs extremely well, which doesn't mean that he should be compared directly to me or directly to Al, because what not only are Al and I different people, but what we did in different circumstances. Sure. The media landscape was different. The sports world was different. So, it's a little bit like it's fun to compare players from different eras. You could talk about LeBron against Jordan or whatever it might be. Yeah. But what they did, as great as it might have been, they did under different circumstances. And in the circumstances that he's been asked to perform, Mike has done extremely well. And I don't envy him his first few Olympics. The Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea, that's one thing. But then the pandemic Tokyo Olympics and then the Chinese Olympics coming up, that is a tough hand to be dealt. I don't think we'll really be able to get a full sense of how good Mike is and a fair sense until he gets to host the Olympics in Paris in 2024.
A guy that really made the transition from playing wide receiver with the Bengals and then really has stepped up and become one of the greatest NFL, in my opinion, one of the greatest NFL analysts, Cris Collinsworth.
Works at it. Boy, does he work at it. Studies film, started that whole side business, Pro Football Focus, which evaluates players. It's an analytic look at football. He takes his job very seriously. He doesn't just show up and rest on his laurels. He has a sense of humor, which means not only saying funny things occasionally himself, but it's very important to be a good audience. You don't want to sit next to somebody where if you get off a decent line, they don't respond to it. Or if you're telling a story, they don't seem interested in it.
No.
He's a good audience, and therefore he's a good partner. He and Al are.
He rolls his chair rolls it right into the live, and here we go. And he's prepared, man, and I like him a lot. He's really good. Let me finish with Dick Enberg and Dick Ebersol. What comes to mind when I say Dick Enberg? Dick
Enberg is, if it's possible to be as great as he was, I think he's actually underappreciated now. His greatest prominence really stopped around 2000. He was doing games for CBS after that, but it was no longer the number one game. And then he finished with the Padres doing his first love baseball on a local basis. Yeah. But if you look at the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we're just talking now about play-by-play, Dick was not primarily a host.
No.
He was as good. I put him in the same category as an Al Michaels, a Jim Nance, or now Joe Buck, as a network play-by-play guy. He was fantastic. He had honest emotion. He had honest sentimentality. He had a great command of the language and turns of phrase. He prepared really well. And one of the great marks of a broadcaster is, how do you blend with different partners? You think of him doing college basketball, best college basketball crew ever. Him, Billy Packer, Al McGuire. He made that work. He was a great straight man and a great audience. He was amused by them and interested in them. And then Merlin Olsen on football. But after that, he's working with Bob Trumpy and other people on football. He did tennis. He was terrific with McEnroe and Chris Evert on tennis, and Mary Carrillo. He did golf. He did just about everything. And he did it all with a touch of both elegance and boyish enthusiasm. I had great admiration for him. I looked up to him. He was the established star at NBC. When I got there, I was a kid. I looked even younger than I was. He was very, very nice to me. I thought the world of Dick Enberg, and I think if anything, his name doesn't come up enough when we talk about the top 10 network sportscasters, however you want to evaluate them, the top 10 network sportscasters of all time. If Dick Enberg is not on your list is screwed up.
Yeah, I agree. Dick Ebersol.
Dick Ebersol is one of the most important people in the history of television because he was Lorne Michaels' partner when they started Saturday Night Live. Now, Lorne gets the lion's share of the credit because he's been there for what's going on half a century or for most of it. But Dick made a substantial contribution. And there was a period of time in the 80s when Lorne stepped away and Dick stepped back in, and the show had some of its best days, and he was responsible for some of the best hires. But his primary legacy is in sports. He was a lieutenant for Roone Arledge at ABC. That's where he fell in love with the Olympics. And Dick, during the height of his career at NBC in the 90s and the first 10, 12 years of the 2000s, he was a combination of an extraordinary executive making terrific deals to get Sunday Night Football, the relationship with the NBA, the Olympics, but he was also a producer. He was a double threat in that respect. Great executive, great producer. And there was a period of time in the 90s and early 2000s where NBC had everything. They had the NFL. They had a slice of the baseball with the World Series. They had the NBA in its greatest era, that era of the 90s, the Michael Jordan era with all that other constellation of stars around him. He was bringing his vision of the Olympics that he learned from Roone Arledge into a modern era. During that period of time, there were years where NBC had everything. They had the World Series, the Super Bowl, the Olympics, and the NBA Finals in the same calendar year. And then throw in a Kentucky Derby or a US Open or whatever it might have been. pretty damn good.
Yeah, and they had Bob Costas. I apologize if your green tea got cold. You can take a bite out of it, I guess.
not that cold, but
yeah,
it's not hot anymore. You know, before we go, here's an interview, and maybe someone has done it. Let me know if they have. You know, you're asking about an interview I'd like to do.
Sure.
From the human side, and you can't always do this, but sometimes you can do an interview. If we're just talking about sports, that's a combination of the nuts and bolts of it, the tactical aspect, the technique of it, the excitement and dynamics of the game, but also the human part of it. Yeah. I would like to sit with you and Gary Anderson to talk about that fateful game between the Falcons and the Vikings. Gary is one of the greatest. He had not, as you know, I'm telling you, he hadn't missed a field goal all year until
he was 35 for 35.
Would have taken them to the Super Bowl. And
listen, I'm fine with it, but I think you're going to have a hard time getting Gary to agree to it.
And it's another guy that it's been said, and I think there's some truth in it, that the best stories are very often in the loser's locker room. The pathos of it. They come in this close. The regret, the so close but yet so far aspect.
Yeah.
Now, Gary had a great career, and he's got the statistics to back it up.
Should be in the Hall of Fame. Should be in the Hall of Fame.
Statistically, yes. On the other hand, you get someone like Scott Norwood, whose entire career from a public standpoint is encapsulated in one moment. And it's Al on the call. Wide right. Just no good. Pause. Wide right. And the look on his face, and Marv Levy clasping hands with players on the sideline, and then that look as he drops his head.
Yeah.
But that's tough.
It was documented in Four Falls for Buffalo. It was a documentary. I don't know if you saw it. Pretty good. Pretty good documentary. Yeah, I think it's called Four Falls for Buffalo. And it talks about those 4 years in a row where they make it. People forget how difficult it is to make it to a Super Bowl, let alone winning him. But to make 4 in a row, I think the Steelers in the 70s had 4 in a row and they won them. But how difficult it is, in 25 years, I made it to 1 and we lost. I mean, Dan Marino never, he made it to 1, I think, and lost.
1 and lost.
Right?
Yeah. You think
but
about
there's so many,
there's
so many examples.
The Braves,
I'm sorry, what, Bob?
The Braves won the division 14 straight years. That is sustained excellence. The Florida Marlins have never won the division, but they've twice won the World Series. They won the World Series in 97 and 2003 as a wild card. Now, the Braves, they got like a zillion Hall of Famers. John Schuholtz as an executive, Bobby Cox, Chipper Jones, and then all 3.
Glavine, Smoltz, and Maddox.
Glavine, Smoltz. That's 6 of them in the Hall of Fame, and then other players that are kind of on the cusp of that. Andrew Jones and others. They accomplished a great deal, but they only drank the champagne at the end one time.
Well, didn't they win it with Murphy back in Fulton County? No,
never won it in the 80s.
They must.
I mean, that team only, obviously the Braves are now
made it to the World Series, but
that iteration of the Braves only won it one time, but they were in it a zillion times.
Yeah.
You think about some of the things that you say. Since we're talking about broadcasting here, in 1995, I'm doing the World Series, Cleveland and Atlanta, and at that point, the Braves had been in the World Series in 91, 92. They lost the LCS to the Phillies in 93. 94, there was no World Series. So clearly, even though the Blue Jays had won the World Series in 92 and 93, the best team in the first 5 years of the 90s overall was the Braves. Yeah. And then they win the World Series, and I'm calling the game. And what popped into my head was the team of the 90s finally has its world championship. Well, who knew that the Yankees, starting in 96, would rattle off all those championships?
Yeah.
But even so, when they played the Braves in 99, if the Braves had beaten them in the 99 World Series, the Braves still could have claimed to be the team of the decade. But the Yankees beat them for the second time because they'd already beaten them in 96. And the Yankees had also won the World Series in 98. We didn't know yet they'd win it again in 2000. So if the Braves had beaten them, They would have had 2 World Series to the Yankees, 2 in the decade. It would have had more pennants, and it would have been a split head-to-head in the World Series, and my statement would still hold up. But now, I wish I could have it back because it was premature. It seemed okay when I said it, but in retrospect, I wish I had.
What is what is the greatest sports franchise in the world? Is it the Yankees? Is it the Dallas Cowboys? Is it Manchester United, Real Madrid? Who is it?
I guess in the world, you got to go with soccer, given the huge popularity. But here in the United States, the differentiation, the Cowboys are actually valued at more because the NFL
I think.
is more of a moneymaker than baseball is. But the Yankees are way, way up there, both in terms of valuation and achievement. And although the Cowboys, have Super Bowls to their name, they don't have any since the mid 90s. So I'd say I give the Yankees a little bit of an edge. I think the Yankees brand, you could argue that the Cowboys brand is elevated by the fact that football is now clearly more popular overall than baseball is. But I would say the Yankees' history and their recent successes, they've always been competitive, even though they haven't won the World Series since 2009. I give the Yankees a slight edge over the Cowboys.
Bob, I think we
what time?
It is dark outside now. We did well. We did well, man. I really have enjoyed the conversation, Bob.
We went like almost 90 minutes.
Well, the beauty of editing will take place, and we'll have nice, succinct 45 to 50 minutes. Feel free to edit me as ruthlessly as you wish. No, it's not going to be ruthlessly. There's so many nuggets in there that it's beautiful. And if you need a guest back on the record, I'm here for you. I'm here for you.
Do a kicking roundtable.
Why not? That'd be fun.
You know what's a good topic? Now I'm thinking of it. If you want to create a topic, is the guys who played at the highest level the longest.
Yeah.
You played for a quarter century.
Yeah.
Nolan Ryan played for, I think, 26 years.
We might get Ripken in there. Ripken.
Yeah, not a lot of total years, but also the total consecutive games.
Gretzky. Gretzky would be a good one.
Gretzky would be a very good one.
Some of these guys, baseball guys that are there, and yes. Hey, I'm here for you, Bob.
Or Tom Brady.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. There you go.
I've heard of him, Bob. Hey, thanks for your time, brother, and continued success. And thanks for your gracious time and for spending some time with Great Dane Nation. I appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks for putting up with me. Happy New Year.